Well, hi everyone. Good morning or afternoon. My name is Pablo Ahijado Aparicio, and I'm going to be talking about a topic that I feel very passionate about that has defined, I think a lot of the work that I've done, my earliest startup, and just even theories that I've worked with and dabbled with in the past. And so this has to do with growth, with development, and then with when to give back or when do we when is the right time for the work that we do through our companies to give back um, to the environment we're in. And so before I go into the story, I have a story for you. I would like to give some context. So Nested is a company that I co-founded 2 years ago. Started the first iteration of the company started in April 2021 out of UC Berkeley, along with three of my friends. And I think as many things, it is many things. And so I always have a hard time explaining what is the first thing. It is a collective. It's a company that brings together currently over 70 remote researchers, consultants, designers, creatives who share the same mission and vision, which is this: to accelerate this great transition we're in, social and ecological transition, and who also have this, I think, optimistic vision for the future, which is why we work towards it. And so that's the first thing it is. Second is it's a consulting firm. We do research and consulting for mission-driven organizations, governments, and communities. And we also have our own projects that do not have clients but have a real need that they address. Third is a living organism. So I contemplate Nested as something that is alive, that is evolving, that's growing, adapting, and eventually might die, as living things do. And the final thing that it is even though it's an LLC, because that was the most flexible legal structure we could find, it operates as a not-for-profit organization, and it is managed internally as a co-op, which I think embodies the values that we hold. And happy to talk more about Nested later, but that's the context on the company. And now I want to focus a little bit context on growth and development. And the approach that I'm taking to these two words is from biology. I think in the corporate world, in the startup world, there's not a clear of a distinction between growth and development as there is in biology, and those are not interchangeable. So it's very important to understand the difference. And so growth is usually understood as an increase in size, in mass of an organism or system, and it can be measured quantitatively, and that's very important. Versus development, which is an increase in complexity. And this can be in terms of the functions that the organism or the system is carrying out, or in terms of the organization of the system or the organism. And it can be measured both quantitatively and qualitatively. And as I'm sure most of you know, there are limits to growth. You can see them. We don't see organisms growing infinitely, and populations, when they are in a resource-constrained environment, as is the Earth, growth hits a limit, and that's also a very important lesson to understand as we go through this presentation. And then finally, there's an interdependence between growth and the development. They're not interchangeable. They happen at different stages. And when the relationship between them is abnormal in some way in an organism or a system, we have a system failure. Think of a tumor as a growth of a tissue without development, and what that usually leads to. So that's my context. And now I'd like to start the story. So for this, I would like to take you back some time ago. I think this was over a month ago, and I took this photo in Antigua, Guatemala. I had to travel to Antigua because I had to leave Mexico for visa stuff. And it was a very pivotal moment in the story of Nested and in my personal story because when I was sitting here, I was kind of sad, but also in awe because it was really pretty. It was a really pretty plaza at night and surrounded by trees, very calm, bunch of mosquitoes. That was nice, but still. And I was a little bit sad because I was almost bankrupt and I actually had to ask for money to my parents, which I had never done before in this context as an adult. And I was in this state because Nested was built initially with a strong urge to create employment for other people. As a collective, it was meant to bring consultants in and give them jobs. And the core team, which I was a part of, was in charge of bringing in work and sharing it with this network of consultants. And I was so excited about the idea of creating employment for others and meaningful employment in things that we were passionate about that I forgot to employ myself really and to create a system that would support me first before supporting others. And I carried out the model as much as I could until I realized, oh, I'm not doing well. And this is taking a strain on my financial health and my mental health. And so when I came to this plaza, I did a thing that I have done in the past, which is to sit down and take a biological model of an organism or a system and try to understand how it works, and then do some analogy thinking and some creative thinking around that to see what lessons can I learn from this that could apply to my business, and then how can I change what isn't working. So that's what I did. And I used the tree because I've always been fast, like ever since I was a kid. And I thought one day I looked at a tree, I thought, wow, so many solar panels in this tree and they all compost when they fall to the ground. That's amazing. And I don't know how it works, but it works. And so ever since, I've thought of trees as amazing models. And in fact, if you think of a seed, it is the design of a project that in the right circumstances, or an organization, the right circumstances, it grows and develops, right? And so what I did is I took this exact photo on my phone. I was on my phone, and on my notes on my phone, I started trying to draw down the different functions, and this is important, the functions that are carried out by the tree along its life cycle. And so to see the seed to me is like the most fascinating almost, because a seed has the DNA, so the instruction manual for the tree throughout its life cycle. It's telling you how it's going to develop and how it's going to react to the environment. So it has that DNA. It also has the initial resources it's going to need to grow. It has a protective layer to keep that intact, and it's able to stay receptive to its environment until it knows somehow that it is the right time to sprout, right? That to me is fascinating. And then once the environment is right, once there's water, there's sunlight, there's everything that it needs in the soil, it knows that, and it starts sprouting. And at this point, it uses first the resources that it has for itself within to start growing, to anchor to the soil, and then to grow the initial structures that it's later on going to need. And if this is successful, and this is like a very risky point in its development, then it moves on to the seedling stage. And the difference here is that at this point is the first time that it can generate its own resources. It was using what it had as backup, but now it's able to photosynthesize with its own structures and generate resources for itself. And what it needs to do here is accelerate growth and development, so it can fully secure to the soil, so it can create its space in its immediate environment and become a sapling. At which point we're reaching this steady growth stage, and a point at which it really starts developing more relationships with its environment that are symbiotic. And eventually it reaches maturity, at which point what's interesting is it's not until this point that it starts flowering and fruiting. And I like to think of mango trees, because mango trees, I love mango, and I have a big relationship with mango trees. And I'm so fascinated by the generosity of mangoes, plants in general. But they don't fruit until this stage, and it makes sense, because it's only when they are secure, when they're mature, when they're big enough that they can do this. And then the focus becomes on reproducing the tree or reproducing the model, right? The species. And it's here when it starts maximizing external value creation. And eventually the tree dies. And when it does, it decomposes, it breaks down, and then it continues nourishing the environment around it, which is even more generous. And so that's the first part of what I did. And then the second part was saying, okay, what do I take in from this, and how do I apply it to an organization? And what I'm going to show you is my interpretation, but the beauty of this is that everyone can take this and draw out their own conclusions. And you don't need to be a biologist or anything specific to do this exercise. And so that my conclusions were, okay, so as a seed, at the seed stage, an organization might want to have some idea of their instruction manual, but yeah, what is the DNA of the organization? And that might change as the tree might change and develop differently, slightly differently, but what is the overall storyline? What is the mature stage of your company going to look like? And so that was one. The other clearly is stay receptive, even at that early stage, or especially at that early stage, stay receptive to the environment and don't sprout. Don't begin developing and growing your organization until you know the time is right. Third is store resources. Ensure that the resources you have are acknowledged and stay protected, because those are your initial assets. That's what you're going to use to start growing in the beginning. From the sprouting stage, what I took out was optimize internal resource use, right? The same as the seed. It's gonna use those initial internal resources and max them out to create that survival at the beginning. The organization needs to do the same. Many times that's a lot of teamwork and understanding what resources, what knowledge is in your team and how to use that properly. It's also build an MVP. Something I didn't mention is the first, this is really cool. The first two leaves that come out, or the first leaves that come out of a seed are not functional. They are food for the plant, but to me, they are like, they're showcasing, they're prototyping, like this is what it's going to look like. And they eventually sometimes can photosynthesize in the end, but many times they're just food for the plant and then come out the real leaves. So for me at this stage is have that MVP, show what you can do, and if that works, eventually it'll take you to the next step. It's also tap into the easily accessible external resources that you may have, the same as the seed is tapping into whatever is immediately there, which is water and some nutrients in the soil, will then find your ground, find your ground. Um, Later on, it's start offering initial services. I haven't thought about this for a product organization because we do services and we bootstrapped, and doing that was really important. So it's offering those initial services to, and that's the first thing. It's how you start generating your own resources, same as the seedling. Reinvest profits. That's something I didn't do. So reinvest profits to ensure, because your focus now is growing and developing those basic structures, and for that you need to reinvest. As you grow, make sure you find what's working and do more of that, because here you're getting over to the mature stage, and so you need to continue doing more. And it's also a good time to begin forming symbiotic relationships. In Nested, we perhaps started doing this very early on and too early on, where we wanted to build this ecosystem of collaborators. I think at this point we're better prepared for that, but it's creating those collaborative relationships. And then in the maturity stage, this is important. I think it's finding that steady state and being at peace with it. Not wanting to grow infinitely, because that is not sustainable on this planet for any system. So it's being at peace with size and shifting your focus from growth and development to external value creation, because at this point, it's when you can really give out more than you need to retain. It's a point where you start nourishing your environment, and following that reproductive cycle, you allow others to learn from your experience and replicate your model in a way that is disattached and allows for evolution, the same as a tree does when another tree grows from it. And finally, when the time comes, dissolve and make sure that others can benefit from whatever is left, and ideally regenerate your environment when you leave. So I learned many things. First key learning was the reinvestment side. I realized that if I was a mango tree, I wanted to give out my mangoes when I was super early in my growth and development, in this case of the company, and we just could not support that type of value creation for others. So reinvesting is really important, without losing sight of the idea that we do want to give out as much as we can. Second is always be receptive and establish those feedback loops between the external and internal environment. And that really allowed to create a lot of boundaries around who could join Nested and how, by being receptive to our internal environment and needs. And then we actually did a lot more interviews with clients to understand what is needed outside and when should we grow and develop. And third is have a vision of what does the mature organization looks like. And that's likely going to change, but at least have that vision and work towards it, because all of the development and growth is in that storyline. So I think it's important to have that. And overall, I think nature holds many answers. This was just a short exercise that I did that anyone can do, and you can do it. The beauty is you can do it with anything that's alive at many levels. And this is called biomimicry. When you do it at the to use it for organizations, it's called organizational biomimicry. This is what organizational biomimicry looks like. This is the organizational structure of Nested, and this is the mature tree. This is the mature organization. And the way this guides us is, these are the steps we followed. In gray, you're going to see the different parts of the organization that are not active, but that will be active later at the different stages. And these are just the 3 stages we've gone through and we're currently at the seedling stage is where I consider we are. And just, I know this is very weird, but this is the external environment of Nested. This is the internal environment, and where you would have departments, we have pods and we have systems, and they're all interconnected. And these arrows show the value that's shared between the outer stakeholders and the inner stakeholders. And I think with this, I thank you for listening. And I don't know, Melanie, if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to answer questions or hear any thoughts you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pablo. That was beautiful. That was really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
So yes, we do have time for questions. So who here has a question for Pablo?
Pablo, this is amazing. I really love the way that you organized your thoughts around like what you were seeing in the tree. And I have been actually working on the tree metaphor and how it's related to post-growth entrepreneurship for a while, but your model is way more kind of detailed than mine is right now. I have a question about the seed, where you talked about how it has the instruction manual of the whole plant. I've been thinking about this, and like you also have in your model, like thinking about being receptive to the environment. How are these two things going to work together? You know what I'm saying? So how can you at the same time have a plan for all the stages and still remain open to what might emerge? Is that like a point of difference between the tree organism and an organization, or can we kind of model it in a way that it works?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the beginning, I literally had an instruction manual for Nested, and it was called the 101s, and there were 101s for everything. So we had 101s for communication, for relationship building, for resource management. And those 101s were like, we're specifying, this is how we do everything, and this is how we're going to do it as we develop. And then they were meant to be open documents. They ended up not fully working. It was a lot of work ahead of time and a lot of theoretical work. Then we pivoted and I think our key documents are a business model, an operating model, and then specific operating models for the members of Nested. And those are more concrete. They're shorter, and they're open documents that everyone provides feedback on. And so that's the way that, and all of the time. So that's the way that we stay open, I think, to the external environment. And that's how we get the feedback loops in, but also show that we have some structure, basic structure, and some guidance that is then going to come in handy when we need to grow. And the focus is growing and not so much having to build how we're going to grow. I think I just want to provide some context for this thinking here. I did some consulting specifically focused on creativity in organizations, and I realized how organizations, when they start growing very quickly, the creativity in their teams just vanishes because they're so focused on doing so much. They lose all of the value, all of the systems that were in place when they were small to foster that creativity. And so it's always been on my mind to make sure that there are things defined so that when growth happens, you are sure that mental health, creativity, innovation remain and not just get diluted by having to do more work. I don't know if that might answer a question. In summary, it's those key documents. And I'm happy to share anything. Like everything we do in Nested is open so that other people can learn. Yeah.
Thank you, Pablo. Yeah, it was really helpful. I will probably reach out to you. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Nikki.
So Shona has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, this actually gets right at one of my biggest questions about bootstrapping, because the last organization I was working with was we were bootstrapping, and we were running through these feast and famine cycles where we would run out of clients, and then we would get like 5 or 6 new contracts in 3 weeks. And then everybody was working overtime and there was no time left for all that collaborative team building, company building, even the administrative stuff kept getting dropped. And one of the things I have as a question, and I think it's an open one that I would love to hear us explore over the next few weeks, is what fraction of all of our efforts have to go to that nurturing of the organization, and what fraction is actually still available for the money-making client, our product building, bootstrapping. Like, how do we split up our time to build organizations? Because one of the things that I found is, like, especially in nonprofits, they're burning they're burning out the staff. And how do we nurture and care for ourselves so that we can provide those caring services to the rest of the world? And that's like, to me, one of my biggest questions is that balancing of the caring for the organization, caring for the services, caring for the products, balancing all those things. I don't have answers. I'm very interested in how we explore that question.
Yeah, I do have thoughts, Shauna, if I may share.
Please.
Because from the beginning, we built Nested with a focus of mental health and not overstressing. So I think there was always this active tendency to not take on more projects than we could. And sometimes it was even like we were really under that limit on purpose. So that was one thing. One strategy is setting that limit. Another one was having a stress tax. So a stress tax is something that we have in our contracts with clients, and they make sure that they stay within scope and that they don't ask us to work outside of our healthy hours.
Yeah.
And that's been great. And then the other is, and this is me personally, I knew that I wanted to not have to worry about money, and I'm privileged I could travel and live somewhere where I had to spend much less than when I was in the US, for example. And that allowed me to not have to take on so much work and be able to spend more time. Like, practically speaking, the first 2 years of Nested were spent a lot on developing this instruction manual and this thinking around it. But not everybody can do that. So I think, yeah.
Did you explicitly tell your clients that it was a stress tax, or did you call it a service level agreement or something?
No, you call it a stress tax.
Okay. So you were very clear with your clients. It's like,
yeah,
when you are violating our boundaries, there's a cost to pay for it. Okay.
Yeah, and it's clearly like explained what that tax is and how it is applied. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's a great one.
Thank you so much, Pablo. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.